Hi, okay, my name's Alex. I'll be talking about my media opening sequence. This is for my CCR, it's my question 3, where I'll be discussing how my media production skills developed throughout this whole process. So I'll start with pre-production, which was the process of planning it all, deciding what I wanted to do, which I actually had a bit of a tough time with because originally I wanted to do a bit of a horror movie of sorts, something in the woods maybe with a killer, and I'd filmed quite a lot of that actually, but I don't know, I felt when I reviewed the footage and I was editing it, it felt so generic, and I didn't like how common and mainstream it had all become. The creative flow wasn't really happening when I was editing the movie. So I talked to my teachers and they said to continue with what I was doing, and on the sidelines maybe think of some other options, because at that time I really didn't have much time left. And I think it was when I was reviewing a movie called Lady Bird, which was a heavy inspiration for this one, that a brainwave type idea had just sort of come about. And I came up with this. So from there I needed to use a Gantt chart to sort of organize my time better, because I was already really restricted on time. I lost a month's worth of what I could have been doing. The blog actually helped me out a lot with that, solidifying my ideas and really seeing what I needed to focus on, and making the blog for that reason alone was very helpful. I'd say talking to actors and all of that wasn't too tough, because I got my dad to act for me because I needed a father figure, and I have a father, so why not use him? And sometimes it was quite tough to get him to be serious, but it did help because it meant that at any time should I need somebody to film, I wouldn't have to really schedule out times and argue as much for that as I would have had I used someone else. Plus it meant that I had the freedom to really yell at him, and like it wasn't going to be uncomfortable because he is my dad. Costume wise, it's set nowadays, it was very casual type thing, it wasn't anything fancy, so that really wasn't much of an issue. Editing, I didn't have to develop my skills so much in editing because I'd used iMovie before quite a couple times, and it was something I was comfortable with. So yeah, let's review the movie. So at the very beginning we see a production company logo. And for that, I used a website called Canva, where I'd also used this before as well. I was rather comfortable with it, where you can create anything, any kind of media, ranging from like YouTube banners to posters. And for this, I'd used a background creator because it's the same dimensions as that of an actual video, so it fit really well in. And I used a drawn image of a director's chair, and then I just placed some letters a bit crookedly to kind of look like they were getting louder. Next up, we have the big opening shot. This was a very wide shot where I'd had to learn how to use my tripod in a very different way, because my tripod is made for my photo taking camera, which is a big Nikon, and it doesn't have any kind of connections for my phone. So I'd had to literally duct tape my phone onto my tripod, but of course because it was so windy where we were, because it's quite a cold winter day, I'd had to stuff it into a bush so that the phone wasn't moving around so much, but this did mean that we could hear a lot of wind. So from there I'd had to further develop my skills, because this is something I'd never done before, by finding ambient sounds to sort of place over top so that the footage audio that we did have didn't really have to be there because it was so windy and you really couldn't hear much. So the car scene was a real challenge. This I had had to film maybe 3 times with 3 different cars, because the first 2, the dashboards just weren't long enough for you to really see everything. And the car itself, when it's moving, it gets so shaky that the whole footage is shaking around, and the camera can't focus on anyone, so it's constantly shifting focus, which was really tough to have to deal with. So we ended up having to use one of those little navigation phone holders, then duct taping that to the actual window screen, and then putting some towels underneath it just for some sort of padding so that it wouldn't bounce around as much. And even then it was a bit iffy. Yeah, and that was the 3rd time going. But another reason we'd had to film it so many times was because the first time I just wanted a sort of seriously awkward silence. I wanted the audience to feel as uncomfortable with her situation as she was feeling. But after some peer review, I'd seen that I don't know if the audience really felt or understood what I was going for so much as I had wanted them to. So I decided to maybe disrupt this sort of quiet uncomfortableness with some real sort of anger and yelling, because it is the chaos in her life right now where she, as a teenager who stereotypically usually feels these things, feels like everything is just against her and emotions are running wild and all of that, you know. So I'd had a big argument with her and her dad. I wanted her yelling at him. I wanted you to be able to see how much the dad was trying and how he was also struggling with this whole thing. The next thing we had was the freeze frame, where I'd frozen an image of the two looking at each other and just both looking really mad and angry. And this as well, I couldn't figure out if I wanted it to be black and white at first or the same colours, or if I wanted to put a razor filter on it like I had for the rewind, which you'll see next. And I also couldn't figure out if I wanted a sort of rewind sound beforehand. These were all things that I'd more solidified in my mind through peer review. But what I did know from the start that I wanted was I wanted a voiceover, because I wanted the audience to be able to get a slight idea of what was going through her head and what she had just been through and why.
Sometimes it just takes one tiny thing and then suddenly your entire life is just falling to pieces.
Yeah, I had recorded the audio quite a couple times because I wasn't so sure what I wanted her to say, but I wanted you to be able to hear the raw sort of emotion in her voice, because this is a hard time in her life. Things are changing. She doesn't want them to change necessarily. She's angry at all these changes and she's still trying to figure it out. And I wanted the audience to be able to understand that. Before this, I had the Falling to Pieces, which is the actual title of the movie. And this was a bit of a challenge for me because I originally just settled for an iMovie title thing, but they're so basic and they don't allow for the fonts and the kinds of things that you really want to express your movie and the emotion behind it. So again, for this I'd use Canva because I wanted one of those really sort of nice fancy looking fonts. From Canva, I'd layered on top a more transparent version, picture of the actual freeze frame, and then from that I'd use one where the background was just completely white and there was no transparent picture, because I wanted it to sort of fade from the freeze frame into the actual title sequence. And it was tough getting this to be sort of fluid on iMovie and to fade when I wanted it to, because it also kind of had to fit with her voiceover, the audio from the voiceover. So for the rewind, I'd had a bit of trouble with this because I needed to film a bunch of things like parties and getting to them and doing things with her friends, but I needed it all to make sense in reverse. And this was sort of a struggle because I couldn't always get me in there. But I think it turned out sort of alright. To make it more obvious that it was a rewind, I'd added a razor effect. The pitch of the audio itself was something I'd also had a bit of trouble with because each clip already had different levels and volumes of audio, and then from there I also had to change the pitch so that it wasn't painful to hear. And on top of that, I then had to layer on some music, which I wanted something soft and calm but slightly emotive as well, so that people could really feel the emotion behind that. Yeah, so then we hit the grave scene, which is where the music picks up slightly. And from there I also added a heartbeat monitor, which through peer review I learned had to be louder because it was to symbolize the loss of a life and the assumption that it was the mother's life. But my peers told me that it wasn't really as obvious what I was trying to do as I wanted it to be, so one suggested that I add sort of hospital sounds like nurses and all of that, and I did, and I think it turned out pretty well. I used a clip from Grey's Anatomy actually, where they were panicking over somebody who was losing their life, and I added that in, and I think it turned out pretty well.
Decreased breath sounds on the left.
Line is going in. Pulse ox is down to 88. For trauma series, look up those monitors. You need a whiteboard ID. Ortho here. Add some left arm.
So I think this whole process really taught me not to just stay in my comfort zone when making films, when going through for something so generic like a horror movie, because that's what everybody does. And it taught me to really express myself and how I feel more in what I'm making. And I am a teenager. I know how these people feel sometimes, you know, and how things can be tough. And I wanted to really express that and make that relatable to my audience. It also taught me a lot about time management. I think I left myself so little time, and then learning things like the Gantt chart and how to use that and how to just blog my thoughts just so that everything would become a little clearer really did help. The blog process also helped because it meant that I had to look at other pieces that inspired me and really explain why they inspired me, which really did help in the end. I think it also taught me a bit about how to deal with issues when I had them, especially with my camera and filming in the car and things like that, and how to adapt to things I never had to do before. But I think most of all, it also taught me to sort of follow my gut feeling, because I really had a feeling about this, that I didn't want to do what I was planning on doing, that I wanted to do this movie. And I think that was a good learning experience, because I think what I've made now was 10 times better than what I had made then. So yeah, I think it taught me a lot. Thank you.